Hello, everybody. I'm More Gravity. Let's review a great chess game. This game I finished about 3 minutes ago, hot off the press, so to speak. Let's see how it unfolded. I had the black pieces. We've seen this before. So with 3d4, white introduces the Scotch game. The Scotch game, kind of an unsung hero of games. It's totally viable at any level of chess. Garry Kasparov has used this in high-level tournaments. World chess champion Garry Kasparov has used the Scotch, uh, usually with white. Um, so it's totally viable. It's also strange, and the main line leads to a position that is dynamically balanced. Emphasis dynamically. There's a pawn that's pinned. There's this and that, and a pin on the e file before that, and it's a wild position that I'll, as a result of playing this game today, I'll be sure to review the main line. So fun, great way for white to play for a win. I capture on d4 as is the most commonly played book move. Then with knight to d3, I like to test my opponent with bishop c5. I have two minor pieces against the knight at d4. And you'll note 457 took my opponent 5 seconds, even as early as move 5, um, to decide on the right way to back up the knight before. I don't mean to be overly critical, but that's the point of, that was my point of bishop c5, was to put two pieces against the knight on d4 and try to overwhelm the central knight via pressure. Bishop e3 is an excellent and fine way to protect that knight. And is within book. So I played queen f6, still within book, just continuing to add pressure to the knight at d4. Knight takes c6 was a bit of a blunder here. Now I'm looking at the computer claiming I might have played f takes e3 first. So I made an inaccuracy in response. Okay, so I made an inaccuracy by capturing the knight with my queen. My thoughts were just get in a position where I can defend my bishop. The queen's not a square where she can't be attacked, where she cannot be easily attacked. I guess the queen's moved twice, but to a square where she would always have to move twice or more from her starting position at d8. So now let's look at this position. It's early for this kind of examination, but with white to move here, what's going on in this position, if all that much anyway? First of all, well, sort of maybe jumping ahead, but also first of all, the bishops are of the same color. That's just nice to note for later on. And then the knight is going to develop to f6 for black and to c3 for white. Material is dead even. This is a even board. If white perhaps has a small advantage by way of initiative, it's white's turn to move, so white will have a slight or small advantage in terms of initiative. In terms of clock, black has an advantage of about 20 seconds. Mobility is even, pretty much, yeah, that's space is probably slightly in favor of white because the central pawn on e4 is strong, and black central pawn remains on the 7th rank. So this is not as strong, and it would take some doing to get that pawn to attack this center. But then again, so this definitely will go slightly in favor of white, but I also want to mention that the pawn on e4 can become a target. Knight to c3, c6. I'm playing just sort of like practical chess here. I want to hem in this knight such that he cannot approach. And it's just very practical, direct way to play by way of a prophylactic. Not the kind that you see at the store. Queen e5, I thought was a good move for halting the progress of the pawn on the e-file, which clearly then makes this bishop on d3 indeed a tall pawn. If this pawn is allowed too much material, say to jab at a future knight at f6 for black, then the bishop could come alive. That even sacrifices way into the distant future of bishop takes a7 as a thematic type of sacrifice. Supposing I had played queen to d6 and then say e5 were to occur, and for some reason I'm scared of capturing with check, which I wouldn't be, but then I play to d4, then all of a sudden things come alive here. It was going to work better if my king had been castled. You capture on h7 with check, and then my queen is lost on d6. Is that better or worse? I don't know, because I was playing black. Why am I rooting for that? All right, on we go. Kingside castles. Kingside castles is fine here. Don't mind the miss. In my opinion, get your king safe. The rook's ready to come to the half-open e-file and so on. Knight f6 is being developed. He's going to develop to f6, not e7, because e7 holds follow-up moves controlled by the pawn at e4. Rook e1 is a good centralizing move. I'm not all too concerned about the inaccuracy from the chess engine there. So castle's kingside for black, and both sides have a safe king. I should have mentioned that in my analysis earlier. But neither king has been in jeopardy yet. Neither king has been. So yeah, here, pawn to f4 stabs at the queen on e5. Honestly, this isn't the move for me. Why would we extend this pawn away from the protection of white's king, right? There are minor pieces about. There are queens on both sides. Each side has both their rooks, and there are enough pawns to cause trouble. I'm not really glad to see. Well, if I were playing white here, I'm not so glad to see pawn to f4. Mark that without the red in destination square. No, I always do the red. So yeah, queen to c5 check is the response I played, and it's an excellent one. Placing the king in check and putting some pressure along the c file, believe it or not. My opponent's king goes to the corner, and these are the types of things that happen when you open up your kingside pawn structure. The king's in the corner. Black is clearly ahead here due to having the initiative and an advantage in king safety. I'm playing knight to g4. It's the only good move. It's the only strong move for black to capitalize on white's relatively unstable and unsafe king. And of course, with knight to g4, we're also eyeing the potential of this fork, where the king and queen become forked and the queen will be lost on d1. My opponent played e2 to prevent that. black will still go in for the same move, this time netting the exchange. What black has earned a rook in exchange for a knight, and since rooks are worth 5 and knights are worth 3, this is better for black. So that's simple material thing. You have to know this, guys. The piece values. Have to know the piece values. Not saying you didn't, but just, an exchange is usually enough. If someone wins an exchange at Grandmaster level chess, that's usually enough to win the game. That's called winning the exchange. I just won the exchange, a knight for a minor piece. All right. So what do we have here? So there goes the rook part of that winning the exchange, and then e5 is just too slow. And e5 instead we're looking for something like b4. Something like queen to h5, with the idea of maybe following up with an attack against my queen by rook f1. The rook is protected by the bishop at d3. So yeah, e5. I mean, on the one hand, though, it's not a bad move. Prying open the center will make things a little bit more wild. So let's see. e5. Black is likely to capture on d. From d6 takes e5. Instead, I found this mate threat first. My bishop moving to h3, and I think the best way to deal with it is, it's a tactic. I'd have to capture back with my king, and then when queen comes to h5, queen picks up the bishop on h3. Even that's not clear because I could come to h8 instead of capturing back, but then does this queen h5 move occur anyway, threatening a brutal discovered check. Looks like black is doing well enough after that anyway. Alright, calculation goes deep as a fork about 6 moves from now. But the more natural move is bishop to f1. And it kind of was, I got a little bit, what do you want to say, snarky here with my response. Bishop takes h1 is just as good as queen takes, or bishop takes f1 is just as good as queen takes f1. In fact, most often I would play queen takes f1, make the situation completely clear, and allow my opponent to clarify the position thereafter as well. When bishop takes f1 is just a little bit silly. Of course, the queen is still capturing. There's the mate threat on g2. There's moving away is the mate threat on g2, and it's still queen takes f1. Queen takes f1, queen takes f1, rook takes f1, and we're in an endgame now where white is simply overpowered. I am better by way of the exchange, and I'm going to trade pieces, of course, and capture pawn. So, of course, rook f2 is the best move there, or close to it. I play rook d8, right? Even we're continuing to look, as black here, we're continuing to look for ways to improve and make things totally clear about this win. Capture on f2 and recapture. Then the same move that I wanted to do to get access to the d file, fine, I get access to the d file, but my opponent's king is gonna shut it down, shut that d file down most of the way by way of king to e3, and then my rook at d8 is not coming to d2 to sort of gobble up these pawns here. So rook to d8, and now after this way of exchanging, well, I guess black still doesn't have an immediate way to get to the second rank, but we're okay with finding the pawn on e5 indefensible. So on black's 25th move here, rook to e8, the pawn may not advance for fear of a capture either by pawn or rook. Doesn't really matter. The knight is ill-suited to protect this e-pawn. The king is too far away, and there's no attacks that white can launch that are all that convincing. My opponent found the most convincing of them with knight to d6, and then after we exchange these, the pawn on e5 comes off, the pawn on b7 comes off, white still goes ahead, more material to make things even safer by way of rook to b5. Now the pawn is gone, and we're just gobbling all of white's queenside pawns. c4 is a little bit cheeky. Is white's tempted to capture, and then the pin on the knight would be the end. But we just find a way to make progress anyway. And now it's a matter of a few moves, and now checkmate. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'm More Gravity. Have a great afternoon.